Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Good Lord Bird. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we're dealing with the whole situation with Henry trying to run back and, get the password to John and the others. But at the same time, I thought it was kind of neat how they cut back to, them all getting ready and locked and loaded. And obviously the question a lot of the black folk have is like, why are like John's sons here? It's like, what are your reasons? I mean, obviously Cook giving a reason like, some people in his family. I forgot the example he was using, but basically saying like the fight is in his blood. But they're like, no, we're not talking to you. We're talking to the Brown boys, because it's like, are you only here because of your dad? And it's like, our dad, he got us for Christmas as a Christmas present. It was slaves. It's like, wait, you own slaves? He's like, oh, because obviously everyone's like, whoa, that's messed up. Like, yeah, it was your Christmas present? Yeah, and our slaves are white. And they're like, wait, what? It's like basically their dad gave these guys a choice. Either you can just, join the side of being like, hey, slavery is bad, or you can walk a mile in a slave's shoe and see what it's like. Obviously, a lot of the people weren't too keen on the whole idea. So basically their dad made them like walk to a certain amount of distance or whatever, just once again so they can know what it's like, and makes them kind of reconsider. So obviously for them, it is a thing of like, I think it is a combination of, they're in this fight because of their dad, but also because I think there is a part of them that does believe in it as well, believe in the cause, And sadly, by the time Onion does get there, they've already left, except for Owen. And because I thought it was interesting, because Owen was just with them, as we saw, because apparently they had left just like a couple hours ago. So I was like, why did he stay behind? And I guess it's because the fear of it got to him. It's like, no matter what the cause is, maybe Owen was, like, either Owen wasn't as dedicated to this, because obviously he's like, no, you have to stay back here with me so we can, potentially defend the arms, I guess is what he was trying to say. But I think it's, what he was, like, when it was all said and done, like, Onion was trying to go, and he was like, you're free now. You decide where you get to die, and it's like, if you see my dad, tell him and my brothers, exactly where I'll bury them. It's like, it's a place that was, like, very important to them. He's like, I'll bury them there, and it's like, I gotta go, Owen. And Owen's, like, trying to give him his gun, but he's like, no, I don't need it. And Owen's there crying, because I guess for him, it's like, he knows his brothers and his dad are going to die. Like, there's no way around it. But I think it's that thing of, like, because he's probably beating himself up because, like, either he was asked to stay behind. Because later on, John's saying, like, oh, no, like, Owen will be here to rally. But I think it's because Owen got scared. I think it's one thing when it comes down to that moment of, like, they've been in these fights before, but things were so against them. The odds were so stacked against them, they weren't sure that things were going to work. Maybe, or like I said, I'm not 100% sure, or maybe that could have just been John being crazy, being like, oh, Owen's going to show up with backup, basically. So either it's like you had Owen staying behind. That's what I'm not 100% sure on. But as, the whole situation with John Jr., accidentally killing the railman, and I was like, that's such a sad situation, because Henry was almost there. He was almost there, but obviously, like, John didn't know what was going on. It's like, who goes there is what the railman kept saying, but John accidentally killed him. And it turns out anyone he had armed up and was ready to fight ran away when it was all said and done. So they don't even have that support. They're out there somewhere armed, but we don't have that, because there was a bunch, but I mean, we never even got that exact number. But what, and it turns out, like, because obviously Henry's saying, like, the railman died with $500 in his pocket. Now, no one ever understood where he got that money from, considering he just handled bags. And he was saying, like, white people laughed about it, made jokes about the situation, about, like, oh, how he got that 500, and the sad thing is that John Jr., in his attempt to save the Negro, ended up killing, like, the first death at that place was a black person. A black person died, and John Jr. was trying to save black people. So it's just, just the effed upness of it all. And obviously when the time comes, like, their dad's like, hey, Onion, wait, you're here? Oh, like, you being here is such a blessing and stuff like that. And obviously, John being shaken up by what happened. And obviously, Henry trying to spin it to be like, oh yeah, there was a bunch of them. Yeah, we got a bunch. It's like, well, how many? A bunch. That's why at the point you're like, okay, what happened? Like, obviously we know the railman got killed, but beyond that, like, at that time we didn't know what else happened. So it's like, what is Henry avoiding talking about? And so obviously word gets out about, like, I love those guys just like randomly walking up and they're looking, hey, we're looking for a William. There's no William here. Hey, John, or it was either John or it was like Dad or whatever, whoever it was that was calling to him was kind of like, hey, this guy's name, oh, that you're William? Okay, actually William's in here. But it's like they talked about like, oh yeah, some colored girl ended up shooting someone, and then it gets revealed, and it's like there's no one coming, is there? So they're in this on their own. Now they know that. And, obviously John takes it better than everyone thought he would. He's trying to say, like, Jesus is walking with us. Jesus is walking with us. Like, you don't have to tell me. So he's saying that we'll stay here, even though, like, they know, like, eventually saying that, later on it's like, oh, like, I want everyone to know what we're up to, because the moment the alarms sound and stuff like that, all the colored folk will come from all around and be rallied up and ready to fight. And he's like, oh, we're going to have, I forgot what he asked for. It was something he asked for. You asked for a trumpet. He's like, yeah, we'll play the trumpet. He's like, does someone actually have a trumpet? Do you have a trumpet? He's like, okay, no one has a trumpet. And all of a sudden, they're bringing in more and more hostages. He's like, whoa, we don't need more hostages. Actually, come on in, make yourself at home. And it's like, wait, what? I love that this show does combine like both that dark seriousness while also maintaining some form of levity, because now it's like the whole, like, mayor's kind of trying to have a talk to him and stuff like that, like trying to figure out, like, a way to mediate this situation. And it's like, all right, we'll bring out one person later on, because it's like one dude comes up and he's like, yeah, I'm looking for my brother. And it's like, oh, like, which one of you is his brother? 3 people walk up and he's like, no, shame on 2 of you. He's like, you know what? I'm going to do this like the King Solomon situation. And he basically broke down, obviously, if you're from, he breaks down the King Solomon situation. And it's like, all right, so which 2 of you are going, and 2 of them back away. And he's like, okay, you're really his brother? Are you ill? He's like, yeah, my stomach's something torn up that bad. And brings him out to his brother. And it's like, oh, you're good, man. He's like, I'll bring, he's like, basically like the older brother's like, yeah, I believe, oh, you're trying to fight for the colors. He's like, about time someone did it. He's like, don't worry, I'll leave flowers at your funeral. And then John was just kind of like, like he didn't know how to really respond to that. And then obviously it's like, all right, some people are hungry, so it's like, all right, we'll exchange one hostage for some breakfast. And he's like, yeah, I'm actually a cook. What's your name? He's like, Ben Blossom. All right, we're sending out Ben Blossom. And someone was like, hell no. Basically, he sucks at cooking. Keep his ass. I love that. And obviously, there's a whole conversation like, this food, how do we know it's not poison? And just even while they're asking all that, Bob and Home Dude are asking that. Got Henry stuff in his face. He's like, tastes good to me. But obviously, it's the whole point. It's like, like I said, there's the levity to it, but at the same time, it's the whole point of, we got to go now. Some of them kept telling him to go, but he's like, no, because in his mind, it's like, this is where we're meant to be. God gave me a vision of where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be here, so we're going to get this done. Like, we're going to stand and fight. They're going to come. Like, we're going to make this grandstand, and the fact of the matter is, those colored people are going to come and join us and fight for their freedom. Obviously, telling his other son to go guard the bridge, but obviously he can't. Because it's like, but like even others are saying like, Captain, we need to go, but whether it's out of pride, maybe maybe it's his own pride, or maybe it's just because he has such blind faith in this that like it's all going to work out, it's all going to be okay. But he sends Onion away with Cook and Bob because they're meant to go try and rally that get the hive and everything. And one of the other Browns ends up like sending him off because it's supposed to be about getting Onion to safety, because obviously it led to a conversation where it was like Onion, because obviously they were asking for Onion because like, oh, she's the one that shot the guy, but it's like, I don't want to go out there. But he was like, Onion, you're not going out. He's like, I would rather basically give my own bones away than send you out there. Because obviously for Onion, it's like, I don't know if I believe it. And he's like, it's okay. All you have to do is find faith that, then that'll be all you need. Like, all you just need. He's like, it's not the easiest thing, having fear and lack of faith. Like, it's not, it's not a sin. It makes you human to kind of basically have doubts, to have fears, to have worries. It's okay to be, you're not sure in this situation, to kind of stray from your path. It's okay because that's very human of you, But luckily, Henry ended up taking Bob and Cook to where Jim was, and Jim's there with his master, who is apparently wasn't it like he's like the great nephew or something, like he's descended from George Washington, and the cook's like, oh really, like oh yeah, and I'm the something of like the president of Spain or something like that, and then it's like, oh wow, there's this sword from George Washington. It's like, here Bob, you should have it. He's like, what would I have for it? It's like, it's symbolic. He's like, I ain't got no reason to have no symbolic sword. And so now, Cook is maneuvering the situation to say like, hey, we're going to take you back, and then while we're taking you back, you're going to basically give us what we need to exchange people for free black folk. And so on their way back and everything, which is interesting because in this moment in his episodes, I was like, oh, look at Cook actually being useful and everything, not just being, trying to get laid and stuff like that, looking for just glory. But when it's all said and done, on their way back, they're getting shot at. And, because obviously, like, Henry was like, Bob, we're doing it, but they were getting shot at. And, Bob was like, I'm never going to see my family again. And, Henry's like, don't talk like that. Bob's like, I wanted to believe, but I can't. And he jumps out. And, Henry's screaming for Bob. And it's like, because of Bob running out like that, it gave the people that were in pursuit were more focused on him than the carriage. So the question is, did they eventually catch him? We don't know. Like, they never especially say what happened to Bob. Like, maybe that was him sacrificing himself to make sure they got away, or maybe because he thought like it's going to end one way or another. Maybe I make an attempt to run on my. I don't know what. You just could see that tear running around Bob's. Bob has never been like full on in this, because for him it was like, oh, why don't we use this situation to get out of here? But it's like, Cook had said at the time like, where we're going to go. But obviously they make their way back. And obviously the whole situation still has, Henry shook, but like being like, oh yeah, James, great to have you here. Obviously the Colonel Washington's trying to demonize him and everything, but he's like, no, you're the one that's in the wrong here. But the moment John sees that Onion is still here, he flies into a fury. He's like, no. She's supposed to be rallying the hive in safety. Because more so, if he could get anyone, because to him, Onion's like a daughter to him. So like, if his actual daughter, if Annie was actually there, he would have done the same thing. It's like, it's a thing of like, I think it's that thing of, being his sons is one thing, but Onion's supposed to be safe, at least rallying the troops, but at least more so than anything to be safe, So, but it's like, maybe God left you here, you came back here because God's saying that a child like you is supposed to witness it. Because obviously the whole thing is supposed to be, he's saying that black and white people are supposed to witness this together, this change, But obviously when it's all said and done, though, like when they'd come back, a lot of the people, the faces that we had seen, a lot of them are gone already. And obviously it's a situation of like, okay, you got 10 minutes before even more people storm in, so what are you going to do? Like I said, the mayor's there trying to like appease the whole situation. Like I said, I like there being like some levity to like the back and forth between the mayor and John. But then one guy shows up, and I think he is a lawyer, and it's like Copeland. It's like, yeah, your family sent me because they were like, oh, they found out that you were mixed up on this foolishness. And he was about to leave, but he stops, and he says, like, my answer to that is, because I think everyone was looking like, so what are you going to do? Like, no one was saying anything, but I guess there was almost like this thing of like, what are you going to do? Are you, because you are well educated, because you have this situation where your family's looking out for your best interests, like, are you just going to walk away? But he didn't. He said, my answer to you is, you don't want any more black people to get educated, because if they did, they would read that Declaration of Independence and know like what it means and what it stands for, that it's supposed to be, everyone is supposed to be equal, even though this world twists. But obviously that guy is like, oh, the fact is you got it twisted, like this world was made by white men for white men, and that basically you guys have no place in this. And home dude ended up shooting him in the eye Copeland, bullets start flying from the other way. Copeland ended up getting shot because the mayor was trying to warn him, saying like, hey, like, the fact is that the federals are going to be on their way and you're not going to be able to talk them down. Like, you're talking to us now, but you let things go on too long, like the federals going to get here. And obviously it leads to, shit going down. Like, obviously the mayor ended up getting shot too. Just a lot of exchanging. And then, like, Henry's looking at Copeland's body, and he's looking at it, and all he can, what he's seeing is his dad's body too, And obviously, the federals show up, and they're basically not giving them much of a choice. And, obviously, despite all the faith that he had up to this point in time, even John started to buckle under this, being like, you know what? When it's all said and done, it's like, no, basically we'll exchange these hostages for safe passage, essentially, for black people, but for every black person in here, because I think at the very least John was hoping like, okay, we can get people, probably even get Onion out of here at the very least. So he was finally, it's like, maybe we can use this as an opportunity to escape. But his son was like, the day to go to the bridge and escape was yesterday. Like, our escape path is gone because you wanted to stay here. So now, because he was so sure everything was going to work out, and he had faith, and God told him that this was going to be the plan. I mean, obviously everything went sideways because he moved everything up. He kind of had no choice when Frederick abandoned him. So it's like, I'd love to know what Frederick kind of thought about this whole situation. Obviously I think he probably felt a little sad because knowing that this kind of falls on him a little bit, but maybe not. I don't know. Because to be fair, that was, like I said, as they brought up last episode, that was the last meeting between the two. So, like, who knows, maybe you'd eventually get a look from Frederick's side of things to be like understanding where he stands, like, at the aftermath of it all. But he basically sends Cook and one of his sons, and his other son was like, no, let me be it. And it's like, no, John Jr.'s going, and they're releasing a lady. It's like, we got a lady, and they're using her as a shield to get out. And then she runs away from them, and Cook and John Jr. are just standing there, and it's like, shit. And they open fire, and we see Cook go down, so I think he's just dead immediately, but John Jr. gets shot, like, twice. Luckily, his brother and his dad were able to pull him in, but obviously it's too late. And obviously now obviously for John, it's like, does it make any sense? Why would they do that? Why would they do that? Because in his mind, it's like they had no honor. It's like, you didn't get, they weren't armed or anything. They were bringing the hostage out, and regardless of it all, you still shot them. It's not like they were shooting at you. It was almost like a ceasefire, but it didn't matter to them because it's like, oh, you're the bad guys here, so we're going to wipe you out, And obviously for John, it doesn't make any sense. The firing continues, and his son's dying in his arms, and he's just like, he had made a whole point before about like, oh yeah, his son Frederick was the first one to give his life to this cause and everything. It's like, but to have your son die in your arms, and he's like, when it's all said and done, he's like, die like a man, which is kind of fucked up to say, but I think for him, it's meant to be like, die, don't die like, scared or afraid. Just realize what you die. I think that's what he was trying to imply, like, realize what you're dying for. This is a good cause. You gave your life for it, and like, die knowing like, hey, we're here with you, And he's like, I guess he's gone, I reckon. And, that's the sad situation. It's like, there's no happy ending here, and it's very much like the Alamo. It's like there isn't going to be because you figured it was going to go one of two ways, because we know where John's story is. We know Cook gets out. I mean, not Cook. We know Henry gets out of this, but we don't know like whether like John surrenders himself and everyone else manages to get away, or he exchanges himself for them. It's like, I don't see that being a situation considering where they are right now. Like, there's no way they're going to let the others go, considering they just put Cook and John Jr. down like that, And it's like, I think it was at that moment, or maybe it was beforehand, that you saw Henry cuddled up with like that good luck bird feather, and it's just a sad situation. Their ranks have trimmed down to only a handful of people. There wasn't that much to begin with, and it's like, It's one of those situations. I think it is kind of like, was it worth it in the end? Would you, are you're willing to was it worth putting your life on the line? I'm sure, because I'm curious where some of the people there are stand. Are some of them like, I'd rather die, fighting for a future for where we can be free, because obviously they had their reservations before, but they knew that this was going to be a potentiality, I guess you could rather say. So they accepted that, but it still doesn't make it any easier because they thought they'd have at least some backup or something. There was some part of you hoping for some miracle, but sadly, it also just, you kind of had a feeling like it wasn't going to, be that way either. So, like I said, like they had a bit of a chunk of humorousness to it, but at the same time, it is a very like sad and somber episode, heartbreaking episode, in fact. So, I am curious to see where all this ends up taking us. Next week's episode is the finale. That caught me off guard, because that's why I was wondering whether this episode, last week I was wondering if this was going to be the finale, but next week is. The reason why that caught me off guard too is like, it's such an odd number, 7. That was just kind of interesting, but it's like, I'm curious to see how this all plays out. I mean, obviously we saw how it ends, but obviously there's still a lot of middle parts to this that we don't know. Like, how do we get to that, cold opening at the beginning of the series about, John heading basically to the gallows? What happened to everyone else that was with him? Whatever happened to Owen? Did he come to bury his brothers? Did all of them, like what happens? Because from the little bit I saw the next preview, it is kind of just an all-out, like, we're surrounded, guns, let's go, guns and blazing type of thing. Like, we'll go out together if that needs to be. So it's going to be interesting to see, where this story ends up, where Henry's story goes from here, because obviously this is from his perspective, so this is him looking back, but probably catching up to, like, right where, like, what happens, like, where is the story going to end? Is it going to be ending with John's execution, and will we get to hear more from Henry, like, about what his life eventually was? This is him looking back on it, but, obviously this is them, he made the whole point at the beginning of the series, like, we basically almost started the Civil War, which we know eventually becomes a thing anyway, but I guess, like, in his own right, he was the fuse that lit it, that would eventually, what would eventually become the Civil War in itself. Like, he was just kind of, I guess, early because he changed the date and everything, so things just didn't line up, and just sadly things didn't work. Because Owen tried to make Henry feel better by being like, Onion, like, you're not going to be responsible for whatever happens, because it's like, we made our choices, and it's like, they'll figure it out, like, everything's going to be okay. Like, but I think that was his mind being like, hoping that, wanting to believe that everything's okay while also not believing it. So like I said, also finding out whether what was that Bob situation. Was it like, hey, he jumped out and then they caught him and killed him? Or was it just like him, trying to escape, and did he escape? Did he not? So many questions. I'm curious to see, where this all takes us with the finale. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.